Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to give folks a few minutes. We'll start closer to 12:05 Eastern, 9:05 Pacific, and there definitely are folks tuning in from all over the world, so missing some time zones, but let's give it a few minutes then. Christina and I are really excited to jump in. Okay, one more minute, then we're going to jump in. For folks tuning in on LinkedIn, directly through Restream too, and then this is also available on YouTube, and this will be recorded as well. So if anyone has to dip early, just a reminder, we will be able to share recording out. And for anyone listening, there may or may not be a giveaway at the end. We're talking about LLCs, so you can guess what the giveaway might be. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is starting a business, stay tuned until the end for a chance at this giveaway. So I'm hinting pretty clearly at what it might be, but we're really excited there. And with that, why don't we jump in? My name is Arjun. I am the founder of a company called Doola, which we call a business in a box for LLCs. So really helping folks, and we'll jump into this, do everything from forming their LLC compliantly and quickly, all the way through the unsexy yet critical back office, which is required to keep your company up and running. And however, once you start your business, there's a lot that has to happen after that. And super excited to also be here with Christina, and we're going to be chatting about the beyond for your LLC too. Christina, do you want to do a quick intro and touch on maybe a bit about what you'll be covering too?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Great to meet you all. I'm Christina Cheledinas. I'm on the BD and partnerships team at Carta. We are an equity management software company. I've been at Carta for exactly 5 years as of this week, which is pretty exciting. And I've worn many hats at Carta. Currently, the hat that I'm wearing right now is probably the most exciting one because of how transformative it is. Getting to work with companies that have never thought about giving equity before. Maybe they've thought about giving it and they just don't know how, and kind of spearheading something that's a little bit new because in the VC world, giving equity is just, table stakes. Every company does it. LLCs, it's a little bit new for them to give equity. And so we're trying to make it easier, more efficient, and just spread awareness of kind of the power of employee ownership. So that's my background. Today, I'll kind of be talking about why companies give equity and why LLCs specifically are giving equity, and then how to actually do it, the steps you need to take, how to pick the right plan, and so on. So kind of connecting the dots there.
Awesome. And I am definitely excited to learn here. I joke with folks, but it's true where a few years ago, I didn't know much about this, but I think now Christina and I can safely say we're in the top 0.01% of people who understand LLCs. But the thing is, it is complex, but it is possible to learn. And that's what we really wanted to do today, is dispel maybe common misconceptions and also just educate on the critical factors that come up throughout this process. Before we jump in, one thing we do want to do is an obligatory disclaimer that this is not legal advice, and do your own research, consult with a tax professional before you dive into anything here. You can also reach out to Doola or Carta if there's specific questions here, but I just wanted to make that obligatory disclaimer. And the slides will be shared after as well as part of the recording. In terms of the agenda, I'm going to just run through the topics now, but we're going to cover a lot. We're going to cover everything from, again, formation in terms of should I form an LLC or a C Corp? What's the best state to form in? You've probably heard a bit about Wyoming or Delaware. I'm going to answer definitively with an asterisk. There always is an asterisk. What's the best state to form in? We're going to talk about registered agents, banking, taxes, formation APIs, and then, yes, it's only one bullet or two bullets here, but the big world of equity and how to properly and compliantly administer the equity and set yourself up for success there. And really excited to learn from Christina on that. With that, let's jump in. I'm going to start off with sharing a bit about doola, and we're going to go through quite literally the flow of starting, setting up your bank accounts, taxes, and equity is obviously weaved in from the beginning. In terms of doola in a nutshell, or in a one-liner, is providing access to American entrepreneurship. And what that means is, yes, you are forming a company at the end of the day, but truly that company is a vehicle for taking this dream business idea and turning it into your dream business and doing that in America. And in America means several things. It means with US customers, US products or product marketplaces, whether it's Amazon or a SaaS marketplace, and access to the US financial ecosystem and financial tools, which comes from having a US business and a bank account and a tax number. Along the way, we've been blessed to be backed by some of the world's best incredible investors, including Y Combinator, Hustle Fund, Nexus Venture Partners. And at the end of the day, none of this would be possible without customers. And the insight or problem we faced when starting doola, and I've heard this from founders all around, is that in the world today, a founder truly has to cobble together solutions to get a company off the ground. And by off the ground, there are 10 boxes shown here. But in reality, there's more than 10 boxes. And these boxes include the steps which we'll run through, but you can see here, you have to form a company, get a registered agent, interact with the IRS, which if you've done that before, I will say I've never heard anyone describe it as fun. You then have to set up a bank account, spin up a payment processor, and then with that, figure out, where do I set up a mail address? You don't want to put your personal address on the state's record. You also don't want angry customers showing up at your door, quite literally. IRS tax filing, state compliances, tax consultations, and ongoing support. These are all things which you don't think about right away when starting a business, but you need those handles so that founders can focus on what they do best. And we realized, wait a second, what if you could click a button and build this business in a box that quite literally connects the dots so that there's one place, one point of contact, in this case, doola, that helps navigate you through this process. And it might not do everything. We might partner with best-in-class companies to help with different parts of the stack, but it gives you peace of mind and safety that you know these processes will be taken care of. And the most important thing is that it's working so far for customers around the world. That means even if you don't live in the United States or you live outside the United States, and that's misconception number one I will share. If you do not live inside the United States, you can actually form a US company, an LLC or C Corp, get a tax number, open up a business bank account, and compliantly file taxes. With that, let's jump into the process for forming a business. And I'm going to start with a few things. We're going to run through the process. Then while we're going through this, I want you to think, do you know if you should form an LLC or a C Corp? And do you know the best state to form it? Those are the two most common questions we get. And I'm going to answer those questions. But first, just zoom out a second and share, this is the process that you run through when setting up a business. The first is you have to form your company. What is happening when you form a company is you are filling out a form that is then submitted to the state or the Secretary of State. So let's use Delaware as an example. You would go to the state's website and input a form which includes some key pieces of information, your company name, an address, an email, and then some business information too. This part of the process is dependent on the state. It can typically take a few business days, usually a week on average from what we've seen, but it could take a little longer. And again, you can see the dependency here is state processing speeds. We'll come back to, or we're about to get to, LLC versus C Corp next. The next thing is once you get the LLC or C Corp formed, the state's going to return what is called your Articles of Organization or a Certificate of Incorporation. Think of that as the official document that shows your entity has been formed. Congrats, it is a magical moment. And once you get that entity formed, the next step is you can apply for your EIN or Employer Identification Number. Think of your EIN as a social security number for your business. The same way as an individual, you have a social security number and the US government/IRS can identify you with that. This EIN is how your business is categorized and identified by the US as well. If you are a US citizen / have a US social security number, you can get your EIN quickly within a business day. Sometimes though it takes more because the IRS website does have bugs and glitch out. It's a website too, but typically it's a business day or two. If you do not have a US social security number, unfortunately, yes, we are in 2023. We don't have flying cars yet, but maybe we're close. You still have to fax a form to the IRS to get your EIN. Yes, I'll say that again. You have to fax a form, and that process can take up to 11 weeks. Now, that might sound insanely long, but I will say again, it's up to 11 weeks. We have seen it faster in 1 to 2 weeks, but quite literally, there's a process where a form is faxed to the IRS. I unfortunately think it sits in a stack of paper, and then there's stamps given. And if the stamp doesn't get administered properly or the paper goes missing, you have to refax it. It's a manual process.
I was just about to say, what takes so long? But those 3 things you just described answers that perfectly.
Yeah, and I guess side note here, if you are a startup or if you're an aspiring founder or current founder, if you can compete with a business that's using fax machines, you're probably in a good place. So I don't know here if I'm not saying compete with the IRS, but that just reminds me of that, where there's always opportunity for automation. Okay, so let's say you do fax that form, you don't have a social, don't worry, you can still get your EIN. Once it comes back from the IRS, the next step is setting up a business bank account. The business bank account is critical because it is required to then connect to a payment processor, and it allows you to collect payments in US dollars. Also, if you are selling to US customers or want to sell to US customers or use a tool like Amazon to sell, you do need a business bank account, a US business bank account, and that payment processor. Now, there are several banking options you can use. Not all of them will allow non-US residents without a social to open an account, and some banks will still require that you physically walk into the branch. So if you live in the US, you could go to Bank of America, Wells Fargo, whatever it might be. Outside the US, typically you either have to visit the branch physically, which can be tough, or there are neobank options that can support non-US residents without a social. And the final step is then setting up your payment processor. There are tools like Stripe, tools like PayPal that you can then connect to your bank account. Okay, now I know I've hinted at the main question here, so I'm going to actually just answer here. Should you form an LLC or a C Corp? And the major considerations to keep in mind are, first, understanding the difference. An LLC is a limited liability company, and that's a big reason why folks form them, for that liability protection. And what liability protection is, no one wants this to happen, but let's say there's the asymmetric downside scenario. If you start a business, you're selling something or selling some service, and you get sued. You misled a customer, the product was defunct, whatever it might be, a customer sues you. If you do not have an entity or an LLC, you are a sole proprietor. What that means is that there is no veil of protection between the company and you, which means in the case of a lawsuit, your personal assets are at risk. That's incredibly scary. No one wants that to happen. And an LLC can be a fantastic way to give you that liability protection. Now, a C corporation, is typically used when you're raising US venture capital. You're able to administer shares more easily. You can set up a board. You can give equity. And this is a topic we're going to dive into in much depth. If you are raising US venture capital, and Christina might chime in here with some caveats, but if you are raising US venture capital, oftentimes, or most of the time, investors will require a Delaware C corporation. But maybe here, Christina, if you've noticed anything or seen anything in terms of that split or that mix changing in terms of the US investor requirement for C corps.
You're totally right that it's usually recommended and is typically the path that companies go if they're thinking about raising funds from a VC. We've noticed, and I would say from what I've been hearing, 15 years ago, if you were an LLC, you hands down could not raise any funds from a VC. Today, they're getting a little bit more comfortable. More companies are forming LLCs. They're becoming a lot more popular. And so some of the VCs are also, in some cases, allowing the company to remain an LLC, and they're not having such a hard stance on it anymore. And there's a lot of benefits to an LLC, which I'm sure we'll go through either in my session or in yours, of why companies are choosing to be an LLC and kind of what that reason is. But definitely would say it's not as hard of a line anymore that you have to be a C Corp. It's definitely recommended by most lawyers, but if you've decided to be an LLC and there's a specific reason, you might not actually have to convert. So just something to keep in mind and to definitely talk to legal counsel about, and your potential investors as well.
Really important caveat. And to summarize here, it's not that you can't raise capital with an LLC. Oftentimes, and up until now, I would say that investors typically do require that, but it's not impossible to. And it looks like things are changing there trend-wise as well. But to simplify here, or to have sort of a decision tree, most of the time, if you are not raising venture capital, an LLC is going to be the simpler, more flexible choice. And you can see the list of reasons why here. One big one is that you're not subject to double taxation. With a C Corp, there's a corporate tax, and then there's a tax an individual would pay on profits or revenue that passes through. There's two tax rates there. An LLC, you're taxed once. It's a pass-through entity. They're also more flexible. You don't have to elect a board. You have more tax election options as well. And the biggest thing too is you still get that liability protection. So the summary here I would say is, asterisks, always check. Your type of business could have a different requirement. But if you're not raising venture, an LLC is often the way to go. If you are, especially in the US, a C corporation might be required, but things are changing there. Now,
and just one more note on the taxes, kind of, Arjun mentioned this, but why a founder might select this flow through entity like an LLC for the tax benefits. It's particularly true when an owner can take advantage of the flow through of losses if kind of the business is generating significant profits. Those can be distributed each year as opposed to being reinvested in the business. So there's kind of a benefit there also of, or I guess maybe a reasoning why a founder might be choosing that pass through taxes. It's definitely beneficial in many cases, either to pass through the losses or to kind of distribute out the profits each year.
Yeah, it's a really good call out there. In addition, let's say you've gone through that process and you've decided, okay, an LLC is the way to go. A next question that comes is, okay, what state should I form in? Now, most folks do think that Delaware is where you should form an LLC. And the reason why this happens is because Delaware is the most popular state in the US for entity formation. The largest number of companies formed in the US have come in Delaware as well. Most of Fortune 500 companies are also Delaware companies as well. So given all of this, folks think, okay, if all of this is happening, I should form in Delaware. But the truth is, it's not always best to form there. And the reason for that is, if you do live in the United States, the best state to form in is actually the state you live in because you are doing business there. You are physically located there. So you shouldn't just form in Delaware because Delaware is a sexy state or a lot of companies are formed there. Form in the state you live in because then you would pay fees in multiple states if you form in Delaware. If you are a non-US resident, typically it comes down to Wyoming versus Delaware, but you can actually choose any state in the US to form in. Now, a lot of folks then say, okay, let's say I'm a US resident, makes sense. I'll form in the state I'm living in, or I can form in Delaware and the state I'm living in and file what's called a foreign qualification, which allows you to do business in another state. If you live outside the US, you can choose any state. We've often seen that it comes down to Wyoming or Delaware. And the recommendation, because folks often ask, okay, what would you recommend, is Wyoming is slightly cheaper in terms of the annual fee you pay to the state. And don't sleep on Wyoming. The first LLC was invented in Wyoming. Some call it the Swiss Alps of the Rockies. They're incredibly proactive in pushing the boundaries on legal legislation. Crypto friendly too. They've been doing some interesting stuff there. They were one of the first states to launch the ability to register a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, as an LLC. So just because a lot of Fortune 500 companies aren't from there, don't sleep on Wyoming. But you can't go wrong with Delaware as well, given the prestige, given that it is a good go-to option there. Last couple things. In terms of just doola specifically, doola is able to help with formation and taxes and compliance. And you should think about it as a founder as there's this initial setup period. And part of this setup, and we're going to soon transition over to really diving into thinking about ownership and equity. But part of this setup is, again, think of back to those 10 boxes. Forming your company, getting your operating agreement, getting an EIN, opening a bank account, payment gateway setup, your mail address, and registered agent. So there's that initial setup. But post-setup, there are a set of tools and things or services that you still need to keep in track and keep top of mind. And we've built a total compliance offering to handle this, but I actually just want to use this image as a way to run through some of the other things that are happening post-formation. So way here on the left, you can see the initial company formation. Again, company, EIN, bank account, payment processor. If we then look to the right, throughout the course of a year, you're going to need what's called a registered agent. That's required in any state in the US. You're also going to need to have some way to track your books. Bookkeeping can be used sometimes synonymously with accounting, but think of it as visibility into or a way to track your incoming cash flows and outgoing cash flows. It could be Excel. I wouldn't recommend stacks of paper on your desk, but even then, at least you're tracking something. You could use tools like QuickBooks or Wave. But having that is important because fast forward to end of year, when you are filing your IRS taxes, you're going to need those transactions to create that final filing. The other thing too, which will happen towards the end of the year, is estate filing too. So the big thing here I want to stress to folks is that it doesn't end post formation. And whether you use a company's package like we have or you do it on your own, just make sure that you have a plan in place to handle these ongoing needs for your business and company. Last thing, handling all of these things takes a lot of manual work. And one thing that we realize is, wait a second, what if you could automate a lot of these things? And throughout the last couple of years, we've actually built a way for companies to use our technology. We call it a company formation API. And I'm going to run through 2 examples now, but the reason I wanted to highlight this is, even if you're a business, there's ways that you can automate these processes internally by working with doola. So one example of this is a company called Syndicate. They allow you to create these investing DAOs. And an investing club or investing DAO can then create an LLC, and you can do it directly through Syndicate. Another company called Lofty is a real estate platform. And using a tool like Lofty, you can invest fractional amounts in property. Every property needs an LLC, so doola can handle that process. With that in mind, if you're interested in using this as a customer or you're interested in using it as a business, you can please reach out. But again, I think the biggest thing here I would stress, if I had to come back, is that remember, it doesn't end post-formation. From the get-go, you need to be thinking about ownership, equity, and compliance. I think with that, be a fantastic segue to jump in to, before we do, actually, one final thing is, I'm actually curious to hear what Christina is seeing or what Carta is seeing as well on this side. But one thing I joke, but genuinely is true, is by helping founders, you actually get a front row seat into the future, or you get to look into the future, because people are coming to you and saying, I'm going to start this business, and then they go do it. It's incredibly inspiring, and the execution of this creation is incredible, going 0 to 1. And we at doola have this front row seat. So I actually wanted to share the top 15 categories of companies we are seeing. The majority of these are actually limited liability companies. They're not raising venture capital. And I think in this day and age, the bar has come down in terms of tools, technology, and cost to get a company off the ground. But I think a couple highlights I'll mention here. E-commerce is by far the most popular category. I personally think this happened because with COVID, business went from, hey, in-person, brick and mortar, optional default online, or optional online, to we need to be able to sell goods and products as online. Every company has to be 100% e-commerce or default e-commerce. Tools like Amazon are growing very fast, selling on Amazon, selling on Etsy, Shopify, whatever it might be. And it's become easier than ever to spin up a website and sell via any social media platform or offer your own services. So things like consulting, SaaS businesses, software as a service. And then you can honestly see the full range. So it is really exciting to see founders working across all these different types of categories. But I definitely do think it's exciting to see the rise of e-commerce that I think has been fueled by COVID.
Awesome. That's so exciting to see. And I would say a lot of the trends that you kind of mentioned there are very common with what we're seeing at Carta as well. So what I will quickly do is kind of segue into why we're seeing it pop up so frequently. But first, I'll just quickly start with an introduction to Carta. So let me share my screen. Give me a quick second to do so, though. So sorry. Can you guys see this okay? Or I'll do in presenter view. Are we up on the screen?
Perfect.
Perfect. You can see it? Okay, great. So really quickly, I just want to give a brief introduction to Carta. So Carta helps companies and their investors issue equity, value equity, and transact on that equity, all with the goal and the strong mission of creating more owners. We started about 10 years ago, and we have become the system of record for equity ownership for much of the venture ecosystem. And we've got about 35,000 companies, approximately 5,000 funds on Carta, and 2.2 million stakeholders these days. So have grown a little bit since this slide was last updated, it looks like. Our founding mission remains the same, though, and it's really to create more owners, which is something that I'm really passionate about and kind of fits in very nicely with what Arjun was just saying as far as the trends that he's seeing, the types of companies that are starting to get formed and are starting to grow, and maybe not necessarily always rely on venture capital money always. So as I mentioned before, we have, really been focused on venture previously, but today we're also focused on building beyond just venture capital. We really want to broaden the ownership economy to more sectors, to more businesses, and to more people. And so we've, in the past couple of years, really invested in and built a product and engaged with more traditional businesses. More traditional businesses tend to choose to structure themselves as LLCs, but really any type of business can structure themselves as LLCs. And so more importantly, I want to talk about kind of why our mission is creating more owners and kind of what that means. So we believe at Carta that ownership really makes a difference for all parties, employees, the companies, the communities that these companies are in. For the employees, what ownership means is it enables them to participate in the profits of the company that they are actually helping build. And this, kind of creates a really bought-in employee as well. They get a benefit from the company that they're helping build. And on the company side, it really aligns their workforce with kind of this common mission. It helps the companies retain and attract talent. It creates a more engaged and productive work environment. And it gets everyone, I'm jumping around. It gets everyone aligned on, one common goal. So I just want to kind of give a little bit of context as to why companies are thinking about giving equity. And it kind of helps from a community perspective, it helps erode income inequality. The wage has kind of remained stagnant for the last 4 decades. And ownership can really help to begin to erode that. And so ownership is core to what Carta cares about. And we, hope to make substantial progress in this in the future as well. We did notice, though, as we were kind of seeking to solve this problem, is that there's kind of 2 major problems. The first is that there is a lack of awareness, and we needed to kind of bridge that gap of why companies wanted to give equity, why companies should give equity, and how to actually do that. And so that's something that I'm kind of going to double down on a little bit, and which is why we built a free tool on Carta called LLC Blueprints, which I'll talk about in a second, but essentially walks a company through every single step of, hey, you're an LLC, you want to give equity to your employees, you don't know how to do it. Where do you even start? What type of equity can you give? There's many types of equity that you can actually give out of an LLC. And so it takes a little bit of research and a little bit of help of reading this guide of how to pick the right one, depending on what you're trying to optimize for. Maybe you're trying to really grow your business to sell it one day, and you want to get everyone that's at your company fully bought in on it. Maybe you want to just retain some talent. Maybe you've got a really key strategic hire you need to make. Maybe that key strategic hire came from, the VC or the tech world, and they're used to getting equity, and you can't close that hire unless, they're getting equity and they're bought in on the business. So that's kind of what we're noticing as far as kind of why companies are coming to us asking us for this help. I'll just give a little bit of background on why LLCs and why we decided to kind of dive in on this problem. LLCs are currently the most common entity type, and I'm sure Arjun has lots of data on that as well. And there's just so many LLCs that are being created, and these companies want to give equity, they just don't know how to do it. And so what we're seeing also in our calls is approximately 2/3 of the calls that we're having with kind of this smaller SMB segment of LLCs, our companies are saying to us, hey, we want to give equity, but we just don't know how. So even though people are interested, there's like kind of this lack of knowledge and lack of resources, which is why we're kind of meeting them where they're at. Really quickly, more on kind of the benefits of an LLC giving equity and having an employee ownership plan. So first, it helps promote company growth. You're getting started. You want to grow your business. You want to get to that next level. Maybe you want to attract some potential buyers down the line. You really want to, create growth. You want everyone bought in on the same, mission and goal. And you want to build a stronger culture of ownership. You want everyone bought in. You want everyone to understand that they have, a skin in the game. This company is going to grow if they're fully bought in. And then next, because an LLC, true to its nature, is very flexible. The types of equity that you can actually give is also very flexible. So, it's not just, one type of equity like a C Corp where you're typically doing options or RSUs. Depending on what you're trying to optimize for, you could pick and choose a different type of equity and kind of create a custom, more flexible plan around it.
One thing to add here, I really want to second or echo that LLCs are, and we see this, the most popular entity type. And I was telling Christina this story earlier, but when I used to live in San Francisco, and it's embarrassing to admit, but I genuinely thought that every person starting a company formed a Delaware C Corp and pitched investors, posted on Product Hunt, got on TechCrunch and raised venture capital. But it's actually the complete opposite. Most of the world, most people are starting with an LLC for all of the reasons we're seeing here. And I think it's so important and good to highlight that you can give equity via an LLC. You can promote that skin in the game and the long-term upside, that nonlinear financial upside, that nonlinear growth as well. And highlighting that and providing the tools to enable that are very critical. But the other thing too, just a stat, is that there are, I believe, a little over 60,000 venture-backed companies. There are over tens of millions, 20 million active LLCs, and been way more that have been formed in the past too. So there's a huge market for folks who are looking to form LLCs and actively have them. And it's important that, hey, just because you form an LLC does not mean you can't raise funds, can't administer equity, and can't build a very big business too. So I just really wanted to second that and think it's a really important point you brought up.
Absolutely. And I think going back to that point we were talking about earlier about why is it that we're seeing some VCs being a little bit more open to investing in LLCs, is because they've been able to kind of find more creative ways of investing in flow through entities like LLCs. So allowing these venture-backed companies to operate as LLCs because the investors are able to, have a portfolio company that is an LLC. So that's kind of the reason why that's become a little bit more common. And that's also because, private equity is very used to investing in LLCs. They typically tend to buy a company and flip that company into an LLC oftentimes, not always, but very frequently. And so they're very used to doing that. And so when, the PE and the VC world has kind of started to merge a little bit in some cases, you're kind of spreading that wealth of knowledge a little bit. And so some VCs are becoming more familiar and more capable of investing in LLCs. We've also seen the rise of these evergreen or built to last startups where companies, and I guess maybe startups or companies, generate, these sufficient revenues to operate, and, they're staying, LLCs, and they're able to, keep this closely held company, this closely held flow through entity. And so we're just seeing these kind of companies like a consulting firm where, they're getting significant revenues every year. They're wanting to stay in LLC for that reason as well. From a equity perspective on kind of the trends that we're seeing a lot of professional services firms that have kind of this partner buy-in structure, where, maybe in 10 years, you've been at the firm for 10 years, you have the opportunity to buy into the business and become kind of an equity partner. We're noticing that the younger talent, doesn't have skin in the game. And so they're losing a lot of their younger talent to companies that are giving equity. So they need a way to incentivize and to retain that younger talent so that they can, get to that partner level down the line. Some of these firms are losing so much talent early on that there's a smaller and smaller pool of folks that are staying kind of to that moment down the line. And so they're finding unique ways, and this could be a wealth management firm, this could be a consulting firm, really any type of professional services firm. They're finding unique ways of getting some sort of equity to their employees earlier on, and then kind of not just waiting until that kind of buy-in structure later on, where the partner track might seem too far out. And they're sometimes losing talent to industries where, companies were just giving equity. And so that's why they wanted to adopt that kind of thing. That also means that they were having a hard time, or just companies in general were having a hard time attracting talent from the tech or the VC world, as I said before, without equity. And so that's why these companies are wanting to now implement an equity plan. And then there's also kind of this trend of, hey, I need to make a really competitive offer, but I'm kind of, I'm light on cash right now. What can I do to make the most competitive offer so that we get this talent in? They can, especially cash conscious companies can use a mix of both equity and cash to put a holistic compensation package together for their employees. And so that's another big reason why companies are wanting to adopt one of these plans. And then finally, there's some companies that say act like an owner, be an owner, but then they don't give equity to their employees. And so they've noticed that it's a little bit hypocritical that they've said this, but then aren't giving equity. And so they are wanting to implement this, and they want a motivated workforce and a bought-in workforce that feels like family because everyone's an owner. So that's just kind of some of the trends that we're seeing. As far as the pain points go of like why companies haven't been doing this, there's a lot of companies that have tried to do this and Googled it and couldn't find anything. Talked to an advisor. Advisor didn't know how to give equity out of an LLC. And so without any proper guidance, it was something they really wanted to do, but they had to put it in this kind of, it's too difficult, in this too difficult pile. I'll handle this later. And so we really wanted to change that at Carta. The pain points that they're facing is they don't understand how LLC equity works. They don't know what the pros and cons of each type, because there are a few different types of equity that you could give depending on what you're trying to optimize for, as I said. They don't understand the steps that they need to actually take to implement a plan. And they don't have a credible advisor that actually understands LLC equity. So that's kind of what we've been noticing as far as the pain points go, which is why we then sought out to solve this with LLC blueprints, as I mentioned before. Just to give everyone a little bit more context of what this is, we want to make it more attainable so that any company, including an LLC, can issue equity by using a broad-based plan. Broad-based plans don't actually have to mean that you have a workforce of 50 people. It could be a workforce of 10 people, a workforce of 5 people, but you want everyone bought in, and you want to give everyone equity or some people equity. We also want to provide a best-in-class educational resource that they've been looking for but have honestly lacked up until now. And we want them to feel confident as they're going through this process. It's a scary thing. You're giving away a little bit of your company. And so you need to understand, how much are you giving away? How are you giving it away? When can somebody, buy in or be bought into the business? And how does that work? And so we take companies through in the step-by-step guide, everything from picking the right plan, understanding how to roll it out, and who to work with, and the questions to be asking along the way. And this is really set up for, company owners or managing members of an LLC, but also their advisors to help educate them, and to really push, employees to start asking their employers, hey, I'm part of your company. I'm bought in here. Can you make me an equity owner of some sort? So we take them through, what's the most common type of equity granted. We take them through, hey, should you convert to a C Corp? And if you are converting to a C Corp down the line, what type of equity should you give today if you're planning on converting? And so, taking them through everything that they kind of need to know on that front. So now I'm going to take us all through those 5 steps. So the first one is reviewing your existing documents. As you all know, LLCs are creatures of contracts, and I can stop sharing. Oh, actually, I'll keep my screen up, and I'll keep my screen up. So they're creatures of contract. You have your operating agreement that will lay out exactly the details of how your business is run, how your business operates, the partners that are current owners and their responsibilities. How the ownership is split currently, and how the profits are currently distributed amongst the partners. Your operating agreement will also tell you how to add additional members, and if you'll need, consent from the other members in order to take on a new member, or if you were to roll out a profit interest unit plan, which is a type of equity that LLCs give, who you would need to get permission from, and how that would work. That would be typically in your operating agreement. If you do have any investor documents, so you have gotten an outside capital already from investors, you have investor documents, that were signed between the company and the investors. And so those would typically include some restrictions and obligations that the company must follow if they choose to give equity. And so you need to read through those documents. And then if there's any sort of side letters, you might need to read through those. Within your operating agreement and these other documents that I just mentioned, there will be some different provisions that you need to be aware of. Anti-dilution provisions, preemptive rights, consent rights. All of this is fully explained in the LLC blueprints, and the implementation guide will walk you through exactly what each one of those is, where you can find it, and why it's in your documents, which you might not even realize that they were in there, and what you need to do in order to take that next step. So that's kind of the key thing there. You also need to look at your existing cap table. This might just be in your operating agreement. It might be you and another member, and that's it. If you roll out a new equity plan, that's obviously going to change a little bit, and that ownership structure might change. The next thing you need to do is consult your lawyer. So Carta is not a law firm by any means. Neither is Doola. We very much recommend that you work with a lawyer on this because they are the experts that can actually put these documents together. They'll review your existing documents, your contracts, and your agreements, make sure that they've pointed out anything that you might need to prepare. They'll also help advise you on the best type of plan for your company and how it will work. Again, I would recommend looking through the blueprints to really get an understanding of what type of equity you might want to choose. And I'll actually share my screen in just a second to show you what that looks like, to read through each type of different equity that you could choose. They'll prepare your waivers and your consents. They'll provide guidance on some of the more custom decisions you might need to make to design a proper plan. And then they'll draft your actual equity agreements and amend your operating agreement. And then they'll discuss, process, cost, and timing of your equity plan. So a lot of the tools we're providing for you, but there's some legal work that needs to be done in order to set this up that a lawyer is typically best suited for. There are some things that we recommend that you discuss with your legal team as well. How will this change the tax situation? How will it might, affect tax preparation and any obligations that you have? How should you structure an award, for example, to, make sure that it's most beneficial for your employees and for the company? And then, is there a type of evaluation that we might need to do? So there's just some additional questions that you might want to ask your legal team. And if you don't have a lawyer, Carta is connected with thousands of lawyers. And we have a list of lawyers that we typically recommend LLCs work with in order to set up an equity plan. And they're great to work with, and they work with many Carta companies. Next up is kind of like the more exciting part, which is actually designing the plan. So maybe you've decided, hey, I want to give profit interest units, and we'll go through the pros and cons of those, but that's the type that I've decided. The next thing you need to do is actually setting up the plan. So, who do you actually want to give equity to? How many people do you want to give equity to? That will kind of help you determine what size of pool to create and how much of the company you kind of want to set aside for this incentive plan, and kind of where your ownership is coming from is another question to ask. Next, you want to ask and decide how to actually structure your vesting. So vesting is a very valuable incentive lever and a very useful tool to further motivate your employees or the recipients that are receiving this equity. Depending on what you're trying to optimize for and the behavior you're trying to optimize for, and the outcome you want, you might choose time-based. So you might say, hey, every year for the next 4 years, they'll get 1/4 of the equity. So over 4 years, they'll get 1/4. And this is incentivizing the person to stay around longer. They want to stay all 4 years, so they get that equity. You might also tie it to more of a performance condition. So you might say, we have to hit this X revenue target in order for a tranche of equity to be vested. And then what we're seeing a lot with LLCs is actually a hybrid vesting plan that's tied to both time-based milestones. So maybe they've set aside 50% of the equity vesting structure or schedule for this company to be time-based. So, an eighth, an eighth, and an eighth, and an eighth over 4 years. And then the other part of it to be performance conditions. And maybe they have 4 performance conditions set up. And so they're doing kind of a hybrid schedule where there's some performance and some time-based. And I would say time-based vesting is probably most common and similar to kind of the corporate or the C Corp equity models like stock options. Whereas performance-based is maybe good for a strategic hire that you're making, like a CEO or a CFO or a C-suite member, where you want to make sure, and because they are, being measured on a specific performance goal, you want their compensation to be tied to that performance goal. As far as who should be getting equity, you could decide, however you want to. You might decide you want to go broad. You want everyone to get a piece of the pie and you want everyone bought in, which I think is what we hope everyone wants to do. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you might just decide my upper management team is only the role that is set up to receive equity. You also have to consider, as far as who's getting equity, the type of equity that they're getting, because if they're not, as sophisticated, or if they need to file taxes now because they become a member of the LLC with the type of equity that they've received, that changes how their taxes are going to work on a yearly case. So they're now going to receive a K-1 instead of a W-2 possibly. And so that's a little bit of a big change. And so you need to make sure that your employees are prepared for that and that you actually educate them on that. There's also something called, restrictive covenants and non-compete clauses that you might need to or want to include in your plan if you'd like to. And you need to think about, what happens at termination. If my employee leaves, do I want to buy back that equity? Do I say, hey, you've forfeited it because you've left? Those are decisions you need to make. Obviously, you want to do what's best for the employees and for your company. And so that's something that you just have to kind of think about. And then the other thing that you might want to think about as you're setting up this plan is if you want to include periodic distributions. As I said, there's many cash flow positive businesses that are choosing to be LLCs. Sometimes they want to do a cash distribution and actually give that some of the profits out to the equity holders. And so whether or not these new employees or this new equity plan that you've structured, whether they should be a part of that periodic distribution of cash or not, or whether that you're just keeping that for kind of this, founding team or founding group of members, or, the capital interests or the members that have actually put money into the business. Or if you want to do that to all of your employees, if everyone should be receiving some periodic distributions. And I'll just, quickly run through some of the other things that you need to think about. Drafting legal paperwork, again, working with your legal team for that, determining your company's valuations. There's a official word for it, but fair market value of the equity at the time of grant is typically done and set up for the various types of equity that you could be giving. And so it's really important to get that done by a third party. Sometimes this is done in a 409A valuation. Sometimes this is a threshold or a hurdle valuation if you're doing a profit interest unit. And so each type has kind of a little bit of a nuance of the type of valuation that needs to be done. Carta does do these valuations for LLCs. And so if that's something that your company needs, definitely reach out to Carta for that. And then kind of this final step is to actually issue it out to your employees. You've decided to do this. You want to get your employees bought in on this. And part of that is showing them that you're committed to them as employees and helping incentivize them. And so you need to be very transparent with them and make sure that they understand the equity that they're receiving. So first, you'll need to track kind of very specific information, like the number of units that are actually being granted, the grant day, the applicable threshold or hurdle, price, or the exercise price, the vesting start date, and what that vesting schedule looks like. And that's all information that's very valuable for the company or for the employee to also know and be aware of. This is all in the legal agreement. So the actual, profit interest unit agreement, for example, all that information is in there. What we commonly see is people sign that and then they throw that in an inbox somewhere. And so the power of using Carta to track and issue and manage the equity is providing that transparency with the employee for them to be able to log in, to be able to see, oh, I just vested, 50 more units because I stayed another year or I stayed another month, whatever it is. Or if there's that performance condition that is tied to their vesting, they can go in and see that and understand, oh, we've got to hit, $1 million in revenue this year for me to get a portion of my equity vested. And so that transparency, being able to go back and refer to those documents, making it easy for them to actually sign the documents and receive everything that they need in one single place, makes it a really easy process for them and for you all as the company that's administrating this plan. It also makes it easy to communicate it. A lot of times what we've seen is companies are getting hit up by their employees all the time. Hey, remind me again, where was that document? What did I sign? What am I given? Making it easy to communicate, maybe even a yearly update on how the company's equity program is going. They can send that directly to the platform as well. So it's really easy to use Carta to kind of be this system of record for you all and to manage this in an easy way, but also to communicate that plan to the employees to get them truly bought in on the fact that they're now an equity owner as well. So that's pretty much all I've got from the steps of rolling this out. What I'll quickly do, if I can figure out how to do it again, I don't want to pick the wrong thing, is show you all the LLC blueprints really quickly. So really quickly, the first and most important thing is that we want to help you understand the different types of equity that exist for an LLC. So there's profit interest units, there's different versions of profit interest units. What this does is it breaks it down of plan might be best for you. This profit interest units gives your recipients a share of the future appreciation of the company. It makes them an actual owner in the business at the time of grant. So they immediately start being an owner. They don't have to pay anything, which is great in some cases. Other cases, maybe the company wants them to buy in, but there's no cost for profit interest units. It's a really big tax advantage for the recipients in the time of an exit or a change of control, or down the line, if you were to sell your company, they would benefit from long-term capital gains. And the really key thing here about profit interest units is that it doesn't actually affect the potential payouts for the existing members for the current value of the company. So if you've grown your company to where it is today over the last 5 years, and then you decide to roll out a profit interest unit plan, those new profit interest unit holders don't benefit from the $5 million in growth that you've created as of today. They will only benefit from the future value that they helped create as of the time that they received equity. So that's a really beneficial thing to think about. So anyway, the blueprints takes you through kind of what each plan is best for. You've got phantom equity. It's like a bonus plan. It doesn't cost anything again, but it also helps them retain their employee status for tax and benefits purposes, so they don't actually become members of the LLC. From here, you can decide to jump into the blueprint, or you can compare these different equity types side by side and understand which one might be a good fit for you. We also help you compare the different tax treatments from the company perspective, but from also the employee or the recipient perspective. So when they owe taxes and if they owe taxes or not. And then from there, you can jump into one of the types of equity. Again, get a high level of who this is typically issued to. So PIUs are typically issued to mid to upper level management teams. We share the highlights of the plan. And then we take you through everything, how it works, an example, the pros and cons of each one, and why that's a pro and why that's a con. And then the tax treatment again. So really helping the company who's about to roll this out understand what this means for them and what this means for their employees. And then from here, you can go into any of the different types of equity. Maybe you want to check out phantom equity and read all about it. Or you can go to the implementation guide, where we go through a detailed set of all those steps that I laid out earlier on how to actually implement a plan. So there's a lot I covered.
Yeah, as you were going through, I think one thing I was thinking is one, how complex this is. And when you explain it, it actually sounds, this, then this, then this. And it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, a lot of the knowledge is new. And I can only imagine if you Google maybe some of the counterintuitive information you would see. But as you were going through too, the other thing I was thinking is, okay, great. I understand what needs to happen here, but can you do it for me, or who can help me with this? And I think this
Totally.
comes back to like many parts of this process. It's what we've even realized is it's important to know what's happening. You shouldn't go into something blind, let alone paper something blind. But once you understand, okay, here's what I should form entity type, and here's the process for setup, and here's what I can do, and here are the pros and cons of administering equity and the benefits and things I should keep in mind or different comparisons I can make. When it comes to that point, I think the hardest decision for anyone running a business is what should I do versus what should I outsource or delegate to an individual
Absolutely.
or to a company. And I think one of our taglines is, hey, do what you do best while doula handles the rest. And as I was hearing you describe everything in terms of equity there, to me, it makes a lot of sense of, hey, if you know you want to do that thing, administer the equity, what's a tool or platform? And it sounds like this is what Carta is doing and can do that can just help me do that and have peace of mind that that's taken care of so that I can focus on the core business.
Absolutely. And I think the big piece of it too is just being in the know of what's actually happening when you're working with the legal team. When you're making this decision, this is probably one of the, other than like choosing who your investors are and raising capital, deciding to give equity to your employees and how you want to set that up and structure it is probably one of the most important things that you're going to have to decide as a CEO and as a company leader. And so we understand it's so complex. Like I read an embarrassing amount of information about LLCs. So we wanted to put it into one guide that can kind of help you along the way so you know what's going on and you know what to be prepared for. Obviously, it looks very scary and daunting, but it's even scarier if you've just got this file with all this information in an Excel file and you're sitting there and you don't really understand what's going on with it. Using a system like Carta, as you said, is kind of a little bit of a less of a daunting task then, because you've got a team kind of helping you along the way, and you've got a system of record where you can keep it all intact. So definitely feel for the people that are going through this, which is why we wanted to make it as easy to understand as possible.
Amazing. Well, we just hit the top of the hour. This was awesome. Again, this will be recorded. Access to deck/recording. We can share it after. And then final thing is we're leaving some contact information here. Mentioned at the beginning a giveaway that we could be doing. So anyone who is listening and made it through to the end, or I guess honestly, if you listen to this recording in the future and you made it all the way through, you didn't skip to the end, or I guess you could have skipped to the end. If you email me and just subject line LLC, we like to help people take that dream idea, turn it into their dream business. And then from there, administer equity and all those things along the way. So chance to win a free LLC there. Email me at arjun@doola.com, hit up partners@carta.com. And Christina, this was a ton of fun. Maybe we see what the most common questions are. And in the future, we could do deep dives or other sessions too.
You got it. And if anyone wants to check out LLC Blueprints, it's carta.com/learn/blueprints.
Sweet.
Thanks so much, Arjun.
Thank you. Yeah. And thank you
Have a
everyone
great
for
day.
tuning in.